A very good morning or good afternoon to you, wherever you are in the world today. My name is Steve Hall, and it's my pleasure as editor here at Procurement Leaders to welcome you to the latest instalment of our webinar program, brought to you in conjunction with Roslyn Analytics. Today, we'll be turning our attention to the subject of turning data into a business case for procurement. And really, who can afford to ignore that in this day and age? It's an extremely important topic, and we're lucky to be joined by several experts in the field. I'll get around to introducing those in a moment, but what we're going to be looking at today, let's delve into that for a moment. While procurement teams might have a grasp on what is being spent and where, getting behind that information, understanding what else can be gained from spend visibility in the context of the wider business, that can work wonders, and I think that's really the value that we're going to be looking for today. In this webinar, we're going to look at the capabilities and processes that can match the strategic use of spend data and make it a reality, and explore how procurement can master and enrich existing data in order to deliver greater business value. So what does that mean? That means improving the availability, knowledge transfer and value of spend data. It means developing the capability to turn data into an argument and communicating that to stakeholders. It means using data to understand where you are with business priorities and where to go from there. And of course, identifying opportunities to do things like rationalizing tail spend, managing risk, and looking at supplier diversity. So lots of opportunities there. Let's join the panel. We're very pleased to welcome, first we'll be introducing Steve Bergham. He is the Head of Strategic Sourcing and Supply Management at Linklaters, a global law firm. He is responsible for all sourcing engagements and establishing best practice process and policy within Linklaters. And as part of his work, he has implemented supplier management capabilities backed up by a robust governance regime. So we're very looking forward to hearing from Steve. We're also going to be hearing from Paul Cook. We're very pleased to welcome him. He's the Vice President of Global Sales at Roslyn. He has a wealth of experience in B2B e-market space, and he's held various senior board-level positions, and he has considerable procurement credentials, having been CPO for a world leader in leisure and entertainment. So we look forward to hearing what Paul has to say. And I'd also like to introduce Harry John, who's a colleague of mine here at Procurement Leaders. Harry's a research analyst, and he's developing a data-orientated category report for us, so he's got interesting views to add also. I'd like to remind you that this is a live Q&A event, so we're very keen to hear from you, the listeners. I know our panel are sort of itching to answer your questions, so please do at any point. You'll notice on your screen you'll have an opportunity to get those across to us. The recording will be made available after the event, so if you're not able to kind of catch those, you will be able to hear what we said. But in the meantime, please do take this opportunity to put your questions to our panelists, and we will try and get those across to them as they come in. Okay, so let's start with some of this live Q&A. Let's dive in. Steve, a question for you then to kick things off. In what ways have you experienced opportunities to use data to understand where you are with business priorities?
Spend data allows us to properly evaluate the potential size of opportunities that are perhaps not being addressed. I think that local office managers and function heads can fairly readily get good visibility and understanding of the spend that's under their direct control. They're less likely to be able to see the global picture. Most of our financial systems in some way or other don't allow individuals to get that wider picture. So providing that global overview from a spend analytics tool, we can now see and provide useful insights into missed opportunities where we're engaging with the same supplier over a number of different locations or in different functions, potentially identify and pursue volume discounts which we weren't necessarily leveraging beforehand.
Excellent. So it's already been an important piece of your strategy. Paul, I guess you will have seen a lot of businesses using spend visibility and that as a tool. Can you tell us how can spend visibility be used as a stepping stone beyond just procurement to help the entire organisation use spend data as more of a strategic asset?
Yeah, sure. If you get your data ordered, integrated, cleansed and enriched, then you can turn it into more of a business asset. So instead of just having raw set of ERP data that maybe procurement will use for some buying analytics, if you can turn it into a business asset, it's a much more usable format. Other departments can do a lot with it. You can start introducing cost reduction programs. You can start looking at efficiencies in supply chain. You can start looking at marketing campaigns. You can certainly look at different commodity sets within your procurement chain, within your organisation. So, why are we spending so much money on a product traditionally used by marketeers that is currently being widely used by finance? You can start drawing some pictures together of where spend is, why spend is and what you're actually doing as an organisation, and you can start to really draw it together and really drive some real benefit out of the business in terms of costs down and information up.
Lots of interesting points there, and that's what it's about, isn't it? Driving that wider business value. Harry, with the research you've been doing, what's your with organisational value in mind, which is what we've been talking about? How can procurement use data beyond simply just transactions?
Well, I think obviously it's key, the use of spend analysis. With, as you were saying earlier before, guys, the sort of eye towards pricing and discounts in contract reviews and things like that is no doubt key. I think additional opportunities also exist when you think about promoting procurement as, for example, a vehicle for CSR. And I think there's potential opportunities missed if we think of this data in terms only of spend, in inverted commas. So what's been happening recently with the growth of the concept, particularly of the socially conscious consumer, and obviously the focus that we've seen on the supply chain and supply chain risk in line with that. And there's still actually quite a significant number of organisations that exist where the use of any sort of formal system to monitor certain risks in the supply chain, whether that be fraud, abuse, or, for example, waste, the use of these things is actually lacking, despite the importance that monitoring such things might warrant. So, and it's also the case that if and when such a system is in place, what we tend to see is that the majority of procurement's internal stakeholders don't know if steps are actually being taken to monitor suppliers in these terms. So in terms of supply chain transparency, I think looking at data through this lens is another way of thinking about that data and how it might be germane to the procurement function. And it could be something as simple as location, so where your suppliers are, to something perhaps more complex like subcontractor oversight, for example. So I think as well as the more maybe tangible commercial benefits of monitoring and be able to act on these issues that may occur in the supply chain, I think procurement can probably harness this data and actually drive their organisation CSR efforts forward in identifying and be able to react to problem areas that come up and providing a level of openness to consumers who, in the future at least, will drive and influence these important purchasing decisions.
Absolutely. I mean, it's an interesting point. And I mean, you've picked CSR there, but there are so many other sort of facets of value, and it's going to depend on the organisation and the industry. But it'd be interesting to hear, perhaps maybe Steve, we could hear from you. But can you give us an idea of a few instances where spend visibility has played a strategic role in your organisation? Simply outside of just understanding what you're spending.
To be frank, we're primarily using it for spend, and we are primarily using it for renegotiating contracts and bringing spend down. We're relatively new to using the information that a spend analytics tool can provide to us. Areas which we've been focusing on have included things such as courier, where we are able to now identify how many different couriers we have globally and how much we're spending with them, and where we're not actually leveraging that global spend across all those various offices. But at this point, we don't use it beyond that type of functionality.
Sure, but and there's an opportunity to provide value if you can get those insights. I think that's quite a key point. I mean, Paul, let's come to you. I mean, what are the processes involved in turning spend data into spend insight? How do we take that data and try and go beyond and try and find real insights that are going to help us create value?
Okay, I think at first glance, most data problems are in fact integration problems. People tend to hold their data on different ERP systems in different parts of the world, using different structures and different taxonomies to suit the requirements of the business. Many businesses have different ways of handling taxonomy at manufacturing level to reporting level. So there's an initial problem. I think they need to collect the data and understand the data at a corporate level is probably the most challenging first step that organisations take. I think so. In order to do this, they probably need to do what we would call ICE, so integrate, cleanse, and enrich. So that first part is to integrate the data, extract it from the ERP platforms in a common template, preferably by easy-to-use extraction tools, get it into a central place, ideally on the cloud. You now have all your data in one place. Once you have that, you can cleanse the data. So you can dedupe it, you can address cleanse it, you can normalize it. So by normalization, I mean we return I.B.M and IBM, Intelligent Business Machines, IBM Europe into IBM. So we can start seeing the spending of a particular supplier. We can also dedupe it, and then we'll have what we call good data. So we've removed all the bad data and we'll have a source of good data. The next point is to actually enrich the data. So we'll add premium sources to it, such as Dun & Bradstreet, Google address, for things like credit risks, geocoding, parent-child relationships. You've now got the very clean data which we can now class as our business asset. So it's gone beyond this ERP data to this now very valuable business asset that is worth something to organizations. And we have to remember that once we've done this, it's not a one and done. If you just do that and then go back to life as normal, you will certainly find your data eroding over time. It's very important to refresh the data, ideally on a monthly basis. Some organizations like big retailers will do this on a daily basis. But if you just let your data erode, all you'll be doing is going back to where you started from. So to me, I think it's key not only to address the data, to integrate it, to cleanse it, enrich it, but to keep the process going at least on a monthly basis.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess there's several facets to that and several challenges in that, building it into your workflow, but also that kind of initial rollout and understanding where the data is and how you can enrich it and so forth. Looking at that from I guess almost a kind of case study perspective, Steve, maybe can you give us an idea of the process you went through to kind of roll out the deployment of a new spend analytics or spend visibility platform? How did that play out for you?
We identified who across our community are what we categorize as sort of buyers, really, people who aren't necessarily in the procurement or sourcing function per se, but in their operations function or HR function are responsible for procuring services from third parties. Having done that, we identified them as being the owners, or we've also introduced the term of nominees for every supplier, by operation, by function, by office, and we then engage with them to start demonstrating where the information is in the, in this case, the Roslyn Analytics toolset, and just run training sessions so that they can see how they can go about accessing that information and what they can do with it. We provide reports on a regular basis from a central capability, but what we're looking to do is to have a more proactive engagement in each office whereby they interrogate Roslyn locally.
Absolutely, and were quick wins important in that process? I mean, how did you go about sort of progressing this and getting the kind of buy-in you required?
Well, the quick win is around the visibility of spend. People may have been able to get that beforehand, but a spend analytics tool, so long as it's taking in all global information from your finances and is appropriately reconciled, for the first time it gives you that information for a whole variety of users across the board. In terms of what people then do with that, well, when they're sitting down and negotiating with their suppliers at the next renewal, they've perhaps got visibility of spend that they didn't previously have, and they've certainly, if they have got that visibility, they can go back and track it over a few years. Whereas in the past, there might have been a little bit more of a sort of suck it and see approach, and doing a bit of investigation, going and asking finance for information to help you build your business case and to help in your negotiation. If you don't ask the right question, you don't get the right answer. But I think now with the visibility of that spend, and also the additional relationships that we have with the parent and their various children, that perhaps enables those local negotiations to have a little bit more clout, a little bit more knowledge of what the overall relationship is.
I guess it's true of any sort of transition, isn't it? And it's something, I imagine a lot of our audience will be familiar with that necessity of building the business case, but also kind of proving it, and as Paul was saying, continuing to sort of maintain that success over time, as opposed to just seeing it as a kind of one-off win. And the other thing I wanted to kind of talk through were challenges. I think a lot of our listeners out there will have had the inclination to look at to using data to gain spend insights and to try and access greater value. But did you come across any challenges, and what maybe were some of the initial challenges you had before you sort of used this system?
We haven't had any specific challenges put back in terms of the usage of the data analytics tool. Then it's fairly readily accessible. But in terms of how people then use that information, it doesn't present any difficulties to people. It's fairly obvious it helps them build a business case. But it's also important to notice that it's not a magic panacea. It doesn't immediately generate an improved deal with the supplier. It's one part of many other aspects of the sourcing toolkit that you need to have in play. Knowing how much you spend with the supplier is part of the value equation. Knowing what you're buying from the supplier is equally, if not more so, important. And putting that value, that cost, against the quality of the service or the volume of items that you're buying is essential. And we shouldn't kid ourselves that just having visibility of spend suddenly solves all your sourcing problems and gives you great outcomes every time. But it is a critical part in that. It's a critical building block.
I guess it's allying it with the capabilities of your team. You need the people in the first place who can use that. Is that something you've come across in your research, Harry? I was, aside from some of the sort of architectures we've come across so far, what other barriers might there be to kind of harnessing this data? Anything you can shed light on there?
Well, I think at least from a conceptual point of view, as long as we are relying on the human touch, as it were, to some extent in the analysis and application of this data, I think it's key to understand that as important as investing in the right technology is having the right people in place to make sense of that data and being able to turn it into something useful. Now, this may be perhaps more in reference to kind of big data, so taking that from outside the organisation and integrating it with the data that you have internally. But really, you have to be certain on how the information that once you capture it in that first instance, how that is going to be taken in terms of how category teams make sense of it, and again channel it into something useful for the wider organisation. So as much as investing in data generally, and by that I mean the whole sort of data effort, not necessarily the technology or the talent, will help procurement achieve a level of credibility throughout the organisation. I think it's important to have the right people in place with the right skills and the right mindset so that data is meaningfully interpreted. And without that right combination, finding the balance between technology and talent, much of what you capture may actually just end up sitting idle in the system and ultimately will be of no or little use to either procurement or the wider business. So I would say, along with the right finding the right solution, that the addressing that talent balance is as important.
Okay, and exactly as Steve was saying, it's not a panacea. It's not going to solve all the problems. But Steve's story was one where progress had been made. Listeners, people listening probably will have had their own challenges. It's certainly not a problem that's been solved by many organisations. It's more of a sort of ongoing effort. I'd certainly, if you have any questions about your own organisations and some of the challenges you've come up against, please do send those in, and we'll have more of a chance to put those to the panel as we go on. I think we've talked about a few of the, a few of the potential problems, a few of the pitfalls, if you like, of where not getting the right balance can create, it can sort of hold back organisations from really getting this working. Paul, I'd like to turn to you. Why do you think procurement departments aren't commonly seen as data-driven entities within an organisation?
I think they need to get back to grassroots here and actually focus on the data itself and improving the data quality. integrating, cleansing, enriching data, you'll hear me say it a lot, that is the foundation of data analysis. Once you have raw data, turned it into a business asset, you can then start doing something with it. The major issue I think procurement departments face, and having been a CPO myself, this is probably a truth for me as well, is that organisations that don't trust the data, they will ask similar questions from multiple departments. Just before the board meeting, procurement will get asked many questions, normally the same question in different formats, and different answers will come out. So what we end up with is not a version of the truth. And I think the key thing is to order your data in a place where, however you interrogate it, you're always going to come out with the same version of the truth. Once you've done that, you can then start moving forward and start building some trust in the data, and then people will start relying on the data to start making decisions. It's not uncommon for sort of 30% of organisations to have real data issues. So and they can be so large that they need to manually intervene. So they might order data from IT department, the data arrives, it's wrong. Hours are spent on Excel spreadsheets and Access spreadsheets, just rebuilding the data, presenting the data in a different way, tying data in from different spreadsheets. It becomes a very expensive and time-consuming job that makes data very difficult, and also it makes the whole thing not a black art, but certainly makes it a chore that people don't want to face. They don't want to face this thing, and particularly at those smaller organisations, the under $1 billion turnover mark, they do tend to have poor data because they're not investing in technology as much as the larger companies, and their data is all in different formats, different locations, sometimes different languages. So I think if we can address this core issue, bring the data into a single place, get the single version of truth, have a business asset that everybody trusts, then we're at a point where organisations can do things with it, and also it's easier to ask for data, it's easier to self-serve data if you have it in a format that's easy to handle.
I mean, absolutely. Having something that can be interrogated seems to plays a key role, and I think that speaks to Steve's point from earlier. You mentioned, though, and I wanted to pick up on this point of enriching the data. I mean, we talk about this idea of kind of spend data and then building it up into something that can be useful to make a business case. Can you talk a little bit, Paul, about the benefits of enriching that data? With external sources, how can you do that, and how can that bring about greater business value?
So the best way to enrich your data at the core point, is to obviously firstly cleanse it, so get it deduped, get it normalized. But then if you start adding in things like D&B reports, Google addresses, you can start looking much deeper into the data. But if you knew by purely adding parent-child relationship, adding a Google address, and adding a few other elements of Dun & Bradstreet, that you weren't actually spreading your bets across different suppliers. In fact, you thought you're being very wise and having your key and mission critical products spread across 3 suppliers are in fact all owned by one supplier, and you didn't know that. You can then make 2 decisions. You can either introduce a 4th company that isn't related to the parent-child relationship, or you can go and ask for group discounts. Say, well, actually, we're spending $1 billion with you. We want to see more of a discount. You can then also look at potential risk. If you know where your suppliers are and you can see some potential risk, like recently we had a tsunami warning. We were in under 12 hours, we were able to show all our suppliers what their risk, so all our customers, what their supply risk was in that area and what the likelihood was of if a tsunami hit, what it would do to their critical supply chains. It gave them an opportunity to pick up the phone and start talking to other suppliers that we could identify from the same supply chain that are in different parts of the world that they already had contracts with that weren't going to get hit by the tsunami. They could start ringing people up to start planning demand. It becomes something that's new to supply chain. Risk is often a big surprise. If you can sort of overcome it in a way that is preventative, i.e., we know something's coming, we can look at our risk map, we can see the potential risk in our supply chain, we can react accordingly, then we can start telling our senior management what the potential problem is, what the risk might be to downtime in production, what the risk might be to uptime in production even, and people can start planning away, and procurement can start being much more strategic and much more valuable to the organisation as a whole.
Absolutely, and this is what it's about. It's about being valuable to the organisation. And from what you described there, it's not necessarily simple, but if you can harness the data, there are opportunities there. Steve, maybe you can be a bit of a case in point here. Can you give us an idea of kind of what you've seen that can be gained from advanced spend visibility? Are there ways that you've been able to help departments with their business goals through the spend visibility that you've achieved?
Well, I've already referenced some of the areas that we've been looking at in terms of courier. Another one we've been looking at is telecommunications generally, trying to see who we're using in each office, where we're using the same supplier, but not knowingly so, and thus potential opportunities for some type of consolidation. We're using it to flag the sheer number of suppliers that we have across the board, and the subsequent large volume of invoices that the large number of suppliers inevitably generates, all of which has huge admin costs in each office. And that can help drive some strategic reviews as to, should we be looking to consolidate some of those suppliers? Should we be looking to move from a monthly to a quarterly invoicing cycle? And actually, given the large volumes that are taking place, does it make sense to try and consider how more effectively we could actually make all those payments and manage the accounts payable process? So we use the information, or we could use the information, to consider strategically how best, from an operational perspective, to support that supplier base.
Exactly, and I guess that point about enhancing your kind of relationship with stakeholders, you can sort of enable decision making that you weren't able to before. I mean, I guess that's something that, Paul, you touched upon in some depth. Harry, you've come across a lot of procurement organisations and how they've been able to use data. Can we say, how can investment in data benefit procurement teams in terms of their place within the organisation?
Sure. Well, I think one of the main benefits would probably be credibility. I mean, Paul, you talked a bit about nobody really trusting the data. And I guess, as you mentioned, that the value of any investment in the use of that sort of data will depend on its normalisation and its deduplication, and also ease of access across the organisation. And I'm sure if you asked pretty much any procurement professional, they'd probably tell you that when it comes to discussions of organisational value and profit and the generation of those across the business units, procurement tends to be quite low down on the pecking order. But I would say that the sort of things we're seeing in the research suggest actually that the sort of intelligent use and application of especially big data, so again that from both within and outside of the organisation, is where procurement can probably look to draw some of its influence across the organisation from. And what this really comes down to, understanding the forces that affect demand. So for a retailer, for example, it might be the creation of a model that takes something like weather data and matches it with sales figures and adjusts forecasts for a particular product line accordingly. So then the supplier sees a change in demand as a result. So it's really giving procurement this influence over that product life cycle from goods in, if you like, to sales out. And obviously, in terms of implementation, this sort of thing is quite clearly quite a large-scale project. But putting this sort of data to use in such a way will go some way to proving procurement's value proposition as a commercial asset, really.
Excellent, thank you, Harry. I mean, a lot of it, and I guess this is the ultimate subject that we're looking at, a lot of it comes down to that question of making the business case, and ultimately, I think it would be interesting to hear from some of our listeners whether they've struggled to make the business case for investing in here and investing in data, because as we've said, there is a strong argument, but how do you make that clear? So if anyone's got any challenges there or anything they'd like to put to our panel, please do get those across. In the meantime, please keep the questions coming in, and we shall continue. And of course, one of the things that was touched upon was some of the by Harry there was how it was important to kind of have an understanding of future spend or forecasted spend. And we've had a question in to the panel saying, do you have any suggestions on how to capture that future or forecasted spend? Paul, maybe we could go to you first. Have you got any views on capturing data around forecasted spend?
Well, predictive analytics is sort of a new fad. I mean, we're seeing it quite a lot now. Companies advertising predictive analytics. We've been asked to provide predictive analytics as well. Forecasting is really history plus. It's very difficult to say we can accurately forecast what's going to happen because in reality we just don't know. We do have the ability within our own platform to look at trends, so we can look at historical trends and plot those trends on a forward basis. But again, it will only be a best guess because the world changes every day and you don't really know what's going to happen.
Okay, thank you very much. And is that something, Steve, that you're looking at in terms of understanding your spend better and looking at beginning to kind of use predictive analytics to forecast where spend is going?
We're not using predictive analytics, but we are very conscious that you've been presented with a snapshot of data at any point in time. It's year-to-date data, and clearly you end up wanting to extrapolate it to see what the full year is going to look like. So a predictive capability would be extremely useful. You need to be very conscious, obviously, when you're doing extrapolations, that you're not taking a one-off payment and multiplying it by 4 and et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, it's quite a tricky area, I think, but there could be value from that capability.
Absolutely, and I guess it comes down to having the right data in the first place to be able to, and understanding it well enough to be able to kind of make these predictions, which, as you pointed out, is actually extremely difficult. It's very easy to talk about, difficult to do. One question that we had was around how you get your hands on the right data. How do you know that you're, identify the data that you're going to be able to need to make the decisions, and how do you make sure that that's clean as well? Steve, how did you identify the data that was going to be particularly important to you and the decisions that you wanted to make?
Well, I think really there's two aspects of that. There's the quality of the underlying financial data that you take from your internal systems, and I think a spend analytics tool comes with a supplier master data set capability of wrapping up the child and parent relationships. So you need to have those two in place. You place a lot of reliance, obviously, on an external tool being accurate, and whether that's a D&B or alternative, you expect that they've got good analysis of the supplier relationships. In terms of extracting your financial data, we place a lot of emphasis on the quality of our financial processes to ensure that it is accurate. We don't look to second guess that, but it is reconciled on a regular basis before that information is subsequently used elsewhere.
Absolutely, I think that chimes with a lot of the comments that we're seeing coming in. I'll just read one now. I mean, one of our listeners says the biggest challenge was to evaluate what data procurement should be using, and would say that their teams would prefer using PO-based spend data, which didn't tie into accounting and finance, so they had to invest in change management to help the team understand the value of aligning with accounting data. Paul, have you got any views on that? Is that a challenge that teams come across, and is there anything you think that they can do about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's always a challenge to understand what data you want to look at. I mean, we would recommend that you look at all the data. I mean, we would run data in terms of PO data, in terms of invoice data, to enable us to sort of bring it back to the source of the initial data set. It is important to understand what you want to use your data for. We have many customers that work with us here at Rosalind will do both invoice data and their PO data in order to align it. So they're trying to make sure that both eventually match, because there's always going to be a time lag and a difference, but we can reconcile it back for them in one place to enable them to have a much clearer picture of what their data looks like. Okay,
excellent. A question then, I think a very specific one for you, Steve, and be interesting to hear your answer here. What financial system and other systems does your spend management connect with within your firm? I'm not sure whether you want to go into specifics there, but maybe you can give us an idea of how it sits in there.
I think that pretty much ties back to the last question last answer I gave, actually. Whatever your financial system or systems are in each client, that's what you need to reconcile back to. That's the key aspect. You place a lot of dependence, if not 100% dependence, on that information being exceptionally accurate. And that's then combined with as I said earlier, such data sets as the D&B data set.
Okay, absolutely. Hope that's useful for our listener there. Another question then, and maybe Paul, maybe you could field this one. How essential is it for procurement to gain governance of your EIP, master data management, and master supplier data management? I guess there's a lot of sets of data in the organisation. How essential is it for you to have control over both of those, and how can you maybe start to get a foothold in there?
Well, depending on your ERP system, master data governance is a vast undertaking. It really is a big, long project. It's a line-by-line project. There are many companies that make a lot of money out of doing just that one thing, master data management. I think it's important to understand, again, extract your data, take it into a platform, cleanse it, enrich it, and then use it. I think if you're looking to take control of your master data, you'll be depending on your ERP system, be a long project. I think it is easier to take your supplier master data, where you can get it out, you can get it cleansed, you can get it enriched, and you can start using it for as a business asset for the benefit of your organisation.
Okay, excellent. And looking at that, what about on the another question that's come in, and I think a lot of people are struggling with having the skills in the organisation required to begin to make kind of inroads here. Steve, was that something you came up against? I'll relate the question to you as our listener put it. They said, as a procurement person, what are the analytical skills that you need your team to have? What was your experience with that? Was that something that was difficult to manage, getting the skills into the team, and how did you go about that?
Well, information in isolation isn't particularly useful. You have to put it into context, and I think there are really two main skill sets that you need to have when you're using this information. One is you need to be able to extract it correctly and understand what it's showing you in terms of where's the information come from, what services, what suppliers, etc. does it relate to. But you need to understand, I think, also that there's another level of detail you'll need to dive down to, which are how many components are you buying? What is it? Is it an annual? Is it a quarterly invoice that you're paying? It's a very difficult question to answer in this forum. Happy to take that offline, I think.
Thanks for that, Steve. Well, our listener there, we can put that to Steve offline and connect you two up that way. But as he says, important but also difficult to take on. Paul, is that something that you've noticed in organisations? Do they have to kind of develop the skills in order to handle the software and the spend management tools that are available, or are they generally ready? What's been your experience?
Well, the tools that we're providing, and I'll talk about my own business, are very easy to use, but very intuitive. And the whole purpose of our organisation is that we put great data decisions in easy-to-use format at the fingertips of end users. So we will have people of various skill points, ranging from data scientists down to junior category managers, using our software to build reports, to analyse, to slice and dice data for various tasks for various people during their working day. So it's not necessarily you need a good skill set. I think it comes back to the core basis of the whole conversation today. Is you need to have good data, and that can only come about if you take that raw EIP data, cleanse it, enrich it, and turn it into an asset. At that point, you have the great data to make business decisions.
And just to add to that, going back to the point I was making earlier, I think the stripping out of that data and cutting and dicing it into different formats, that's one skill set. That's capability you need to have in your organisation somewhere to make it into a sensible output for the people that will be using it. Some of those will be using it live and actively online. Others will just want to receive a snapshot once every few months. So you need to be able to extract it accordingly. But I think the more complex aspect is interpreting that information, using it to your advantage in whatever way that might be. And I think that's the tougher part of the question that's difficult to answer in this forum.
Absolutely. I mean, challenges on all fronts. But as you say, interpreting it, using it. How do you go about that? Harry, maybe you can build off the discussion here. We've been talking about putting data first and building off that. What challenges do you see here?
Well, we're talking about data, and one of the things we've perhaps not made explicit is the importance of the wider IT systems that sit within the organisation in terms of being able to properly capture and harness that data. And I think it's possibly procurement's job to work with internal stakeholders to ensure that clear data management processes in line with whatever systems you have in place are actually in place and well communicated to their staff and others and well policed throughout the organisation. And I think also internally it's worth considering your staff training program and policies to ensure that these teams actually understand the importance of good data so that it's not going to waste or being missed or other priorities are perhaps taking unwarranted precedence over the administration of this data, which obviously, as we're learning, is quite key for these organisations.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I think that's a good point. A holistic approach is required here to make the most of it. And I think that sort of echoes what Steve and Paul have been saying. Maybe a slightly more, perhaps a straightforward question. Paul, perhaps you could field this one first. What would you consider to be the minimum spend of an organisation before they would find a tool like this valuable?
It depends on what level that you're using it. I mean, we provide tools to people ranging from £49 a month. So, level of spend could really be, a couple of £100,000. We have a few very small organisations that use that product. If you're looking at enterprise spend, then you really be looking at sort of, £500,000 plus to really take some value and get great insight from using an enterprise product. Okay,
and Steve, can you build off that? I mean, obviously you can only sort of speak for your own what you've been, your own experience, but you've worked in various roles previously as well. What's your sort of overall view of who would find this most useful, this sort of tool?
I think it's less about a spend threshold and more about the complexity of the data. If you've got multitude of systems or multitude of locations, etc., then having that one extract that brings it all together for you, I think that's really powerful. If you've got a relatively streamlined, simplified operational model with maybe not many officers, maybe not many functions, then you can probably get the information fairly readily anyway.
Okay, and so we've had questions around that side of things, which is this something I should be doing? So obviously there's some people on the call listening thinking, well, it's something I should be getting involved in. That is it right for me? But on the other hand, I think there are those who are perhaps quite ambitious. Looking at some of the comments we've had, and let me just relay one. One is one of our listeners says, "Isn't there simply more to procurement than simply spend data? What about speed of procurement or measuring contract modifications per different products, services?" I think the point that they're trying to get across is you can cut this in so many different ways. You could take a lot more than spend data out of it. The insights you're going to get can tell you a lot about your own performance as an organisation. Paul, where do you see organisations kind of taking this data, and what could they be doing with this?
Well, the data set itself is sort of made up of an address, a PO number, an invoice number, a location. So this could equally be sales data. So an organisation could be saying, well, let's analyze our sales data because the headers are basically the same. Let's analyze our marketing data. Again, the headers are basically the same. So we start looking at data and we can start saying, well, actually, there are many more things we can do with our data. We can start analyzing our social media. We can start analyzing some trends in the way that we're logistically moving things around the world. There's so many other facets to the particular data. But I think the part of the question was, and I would wholly agree with the question, was that using a spend analytics tool isn't a silver bullet. You do have to have a clearly defined professional procurement department that are doing far more than just analyzing data. I firmly believe that having good data is a good basis for anything because you can start negotiating with suppliers, you can start doing all sorts of very clever and rewarding things if you have good data. If your knowledge is sound and your platform is sound, then procurement can go and do so much more than just analyse the data. I think it's really important to understand that this is just one small piece of what a procurement team should be doing. But I firmly believe it's one of the most important pieces in the foundation of a procurement department.
Absolutely, and I think perhaps, Harry, this is something you might have come across in your research. Where should organisations be taking data? What should they be looking at beyond there's a core level to it, but where should they be going beyond that?
Well, I think the listener's absolutely right in that this sort of data, maybe not initially, but once the department matures and becomes more used to using these tools and these systems, I think you're right in that it should go beyond simply spend with a capital S, and it's probably fair to say that this sort of data should actually be taken externally and perhaps used to benchmark the function and maybe the organisation against the wider industry in which you're operating, or maybe different industries who are responsible for buying, or whose procurement departments are responsible for buying similar products or services. Because really in any market, whatever you're buying, these markets are evolving so quickly that simply looking internally won't give you any sort of real idea of how your function is performing in sort of the wider and no doubt important context. And it goes back to what you were saying earlier, Steve, about information in isolation. And what we see with the sort of leading organisations in this field is that these sorts of KPIs that the listener was sort of referring to, additional metrics, are built into an overall spend analysis strategy.
Absolutely. I think, again, it varies from organisation, I think, and the point that Steve made earlier was around a lot of it comes down to the complexity of the data and the complexity of the challenges that you face and what you're going to, how you're going to approach those. So let's have we've had an absolute deluge of questions in, so we are working our way through. But if we don't have any time to answer all of them, then I will put those to our presenters offline, and they'll have a chance to get back to you. But we'll proceed for the moment. One question that I think is maybe quite interesting. I'm wondering if either Steve or Paul, maybe one of you could have a look at this. Can you talk through a typical ICE process and what percentage of a process is automated, including artificial intelligence versus manual cleansing, and does the system learn your data for future reporting? I guess to sum up, I think our listener wants to know a little bit about how you actually run this process of getting the data you need and cleansing that. Paul, maybe you could weigh in first, and Steve, maybe we could hear how your approach, how you've done it afterwards.
Okay, yeah. So, ICE is integrate, cleanse, and enrich. So, the most important part is to integrate, get the data out of the system. We have tools for most ERP systems, and we have the ability to make tools for ERP systems that we don't know about yet. Getting the data out into the platform is the key stage. The next stage, of course, is cleansing that data. So, we will dedupe it, we'll parent-child it, make sure that it's cleansed. There is an element there of artificial intelligence that the system does learn, and it learns not only for individuals, but there are also instances where it's learned on a conglomerate basis, where we're saying, well, this is always going to be the case for any data wherever it comes from. After we've cleansed it, we then do need to enrich it. So we'll be adding things like Dun & Bradstreet, Google Address, Equifax, lots of external sort of premium third-party data sources to really get the best out of the data. And we can go as far as taking an address down to rooftop. You can start adding risk. You can start adding in the various Dun & Bradstreet codes that are available, and depending on the needs of your data, really.
Thanks very much. Steve, maybe you can relate kind of how you went through that process and what you felt the key stages were.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree with what Paul's just been saying. To add to that, yes, products can absolutely remember. They can learn where you've mapped spend to a function or to a category that perhaps the underlying rules wouldn't have originally have mapped it to. They would have put it elsewhere, and you've gone in and said, no, I want this to be mapped to this category, and it will learn that and will do that next time round. My personal view is that you need to strike the balance between getting this right for the information you want to use and getting it right for the sake of having a 100% accurate data set. I don't think that it's valuable to map every single line item of your spend so that it's 100% accurate in every sense. if you're using it to give directional information to support whether it's a specific commercial opportunity identification exercise or some targeted supply negotiations where you really need to know what you're spending on a global basis, you can get that information. You don't have to ensure that everything is mapped to the right category to the nth degree. It's a balancing act, and I think that very much varies on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, excellent. Hopefully that answers our listener's question. Another one for you, Steve. Hopefully you'll be able to offer a bit of insight on this area. Do you find it difficult to monitor the spend contracted to a vendor to ensure that the savings are actually realised? And what methods do you recommend to monitor after the contract is in place? Is that something that you've been looking at working on, and is that a challenge you've come up against? It sounds like our listeners found that area challenging.
Well, it is a challenge. I think a spend analytics tool has a part to play in that, but it's by no means the only solution. I mean, you have such a variety of contracts whereby you may or may not have signed up to a specific amount of spend. You may have just have agreed a rate card with no statements on what the volumes might be. So I think spend analytics in that context can have some valuable reference, but is by no means the silver bullet to what the questioner might be asking. My own view is that this really comes into sort of supplier management capability, post-contract, ensuring what you've engaged the supplier for and ensuring that you are very comfortable that they're invoicing you for services that you expected to receive and at the price you expected to pay. And you wrap that up with a bit of a demand management capability where appropriate. So you can forecast what you need in the future and what your spend is going to look like. And spend analytics tools, they have a part to play. They can help in that. But there's an awful lot more. So
as you said, no silver bullet.
Yeah, Paul, if I can interject on that as well, one of the things that we've learned and we've had to embed into the system is a contract management system, so that you can start hanging your spend data off the contract. You can pick up evergreen alerts, you can pick up retrospective discounts, you can pick up end dates, you can pick up things that that you might not readily have available in your memory bank or on a laptop that maybe has been wiped because somebody's left the organisation. Also, as Steve said, supply performance management is also an important issue, and our next release, in fact, is going to be an SPM product, which will enable you to manage your suppliers in terms of performance, in terms of how to improve their performance, but also to measure things like defects per thousand down on the shop floor. So the whole piece of spend, the spend is the driving force behind it, but there are more and more things needed. In terms of the actual question, I think there is a savings trackers are also important. We work with a third party on our savings tracker, but we have a savings tracker tool that works well with Rosalind, and again that helps people manage their actual savings in a controlled environment against preconceived conditions laid down by both procurement and finance.
Absolutely, and it's the advantages are clearly there, but the implementation is obviously a key part of that, and I think that's something that's coming back quite a lot in the questions that we're seeing. So I'm conscious that the time is sort of counting down a little bit. We have time for a couple more, so I'm going to put a fairly difficult one to you, Paul. Does the image of procurement hinder or help the implementation of a spend analytics program? I can't tell you what our experience of the listener who's put that across is, whether they found it so, but I wonder, is that something you see in organisations that sometimes procurement struggles to have the right image to implement this program?
I think, well, being an ex-CPO, I tend to think that procurement managers are quite capable of implementing this. I think there is an issue sometimes where some organisations haven't been taking procurement as seriously as they should do, and we are seeing a change in that. I'm seeing more and more CPOs and board-level procurement people. But I think it's not down to is it a product or is it a project that procurement are trusted to do. I think it's about is the business case right? Typically a procurement person will report to a finance person, and are they putting the right business case across to say this is going to add value to organisation? And there are ways of helping do that, and we certainly help all our customers build business cases as you expect. But I think there isn't really a trust issue. It's just more of a a return on investment and how that business plan's put together.
Absolutely, and I guess being in time with the title of this webinar, it is all about the business case, and if you can make that, I think that the trust can possibly follow. That's something that we've seen time and again. But obviously, that's only going to come about if there is a desire for a kind of data-driven approach. Harry, maybe you can give us a hand with this. What are some of the external forces that we're seeing that are driving the adoption of a data-driven approach in procurement?
Yeah, well, I think with kind of organisational value and the business case in mind, a concept that I mentioned earlier, being the socially conscious consumer, is definitely one for the future, if not now. Well, we're already seeing interest and indeed concern over how products are ending up on consumers' shelves. And I think anyone who lives in the UK or keeps up with UK news will have the lessons of the horse meat scandal still fresh in their minds, and perhaps more recent stories that we've seen in the news in the last week or so, with slave labour being discovered in the food supply chain as affecting a number of retailers. These things really highlight the need or the importance of having a real depth of knowledge. And with this in mind, I think it's fair to say that the ability of organisations to engage and probably educate the general public on work done throughout the supply chain to control such occurrences will determine the success of those businesses. So for procurement being at the front line of many of these relationships within the supply chain, I think promoting transparency in this way, particularly outside of the business, will probably become central to the function's mission in years to come. And I think in a similar way, we see the regulatory environment demanding more from organisations in terms of oversight of third parties, including suppliers and subcontractors within those suppliers, really trying to instill a greater understanding of risk within the organisation. So I think harnessing this spend data and mapping that or aligning that with spend across suppliers, whether it be by location or criticality of tasks undertaken, especially in terms of, we see with the kind of Dodd-Frank Act in the US, the supply chain and risk throughout the supply chain, really kind of from that perspective, investments in data also, I think, carry the weight of compliance. As I said, increased oversight demanded of these businesses, and perhaps a more robust and consistent level of understanding in terms of how and where money is being spent.
See, I think that's quite interesting. They've got these separate pressures there in terms of that kind of risk factor to it, and of course the case that it's more clearly demonstrated in savings and more efficient P2P, etc. So there's obviously a lot of pressure and a lot of value on turning data into a business case. With that, just one more question then, and that would be for you, Steve. Can you give us an idea of what's next, or what you might sort of see in terms of the future of trying to harness data further?
Crystal ball time. I'd actually pick up on the last point. I do agree with Harry's observation that CSR is something that procurement teams are increasingly being asked to look at. There is now a directory, I think it's primarily UK-based, of socially responsible suppliers. So something that we might be looking at is comparing our existing supplier base with that social directory to see who we've got already engaged, who else we could be engaging in the future. And in the past, it's been something we've wanted to do, but found it quite difficult to find and go who we should be engaging with. That social directory is quite a game changer, I think, in that respect. But the spend analytics tool, with the consolidation of all of our current supplier names, is a good way for us to match those.
Excellent, thank you, Steve. It'll be interesting to see how that progresses, and I suspect you're not the only one sort of taking that approach. It seems to be very, very important at the moment. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have, and we've had lots and lots of questions in, so we'll be sure to make sure that our presenters can see those and hopefully have a chance to catch up with you offline. Of course, this panel discussion will be made available to those who've registered offline as well, so you can listen back at a later date. But in the meantime, I'd like to say thank you very much for joining us. And thank you to Steve Bergham, Global Head of Strategic Sourcing and Supply Management at Linklaters, Paul Cook, Vice President Global Sales at Roslin Analytics, and Harry John, Research Analyst for Procurement Leaders. Thank you all for our panellists for making this a great and insightful discussion. As for you, the listeners, I hope you found it useful and instructive, and we hope very much that you join us again next time.
Thanks, Steve.